May it please the court, counsel, ladies and gentlemen of the jury. You've heard all of the evidence in this case, and soon it's going to be time for you to retire to the jury room and to begin your deliberations. And I would like to review with you the evidence that you heard, the evidence that you saw during this trial, and how it proves each and every element of the crimes charged beyond a reasonable doubt. We're going to start with aggravated murder. Can everyone see? Okay. All right, so these are the elements of aggravated murder. And remember, the burden is on the state of Ohio to prove each and every one of these elements to you beyond a reasonable doubt. So how did we do that? So on or about November 29th of 2023, throughout the trial, you heard numerous witnesses testify about that day. You heard about the victim, Michelle Long's activities on that day. You heard that she went and taught school. You heard that she just was living her day, an average day, very much alive. There's been no dispute about the day that this occurred. And ladies and gentlemen, this element is proven. We also know that this is the same day that the victim, Michelle Long, was found dead in her truck. Now, in Columbiana County, Ohio, again, this element really wasn't in dispute at all either. We heard evidence that the shooting occurred outside of the victim's home at 29906 Cary Road. We heard that that is a Salem address. It is a somewhat rural area in Columbiana County. You've seen maps. You've heard testimony about that address. Again, no dispute. This element is proven. Now, the defendant, William P. Long, Jr., how do we know that he's the one that did this, that he's the one that shot Michelle? And let's go through the evidence. So, throughout the course of the trial, you never heard any evidence pointing to a suspect other than the defendant, William Long. And the state doesn't have to prove motive. You'll see that actually motive is not an element of this crime. State doesn't have to prove that. However, in this case, I would suggest to you that motive is a large part of the evidence for you to consider. There's no robbery here. The victim is found shot to death multiple times in her truck, but yet you heard from Chief Deputy Wyckoff, all of her belongings are there. She has a purse in the car. She has a brand new television that she just bought at Walmart sitting in the back seat. She has a cellular phone, and you can actually see that phone in one of the photographs mounted up on her dashboard on a holder. None of her belongings are taken. There's no robbery here. And so that brings us to the question of who else would have wanted to shoot Michelle in her truck? Why? And why is the defendant's hatred for Michelle? Why is the defendant's dissatisfaction with the divorce? Why is all of the evidence that you've heard in this trial about how bitter the defendant was after he lost this divorce? The defendant didn't want the divorce. Even he admitted that on the stand. And you heard from Attorney Katz about the outcome of this divorce. You heard that after the divorce was finalized, the defendant stood to lose a lot. He was going to have to pay alimony. He was going to have to pay child support to Michelle. He lost his property. He lost that acreage we talked about. He owed her $100,000 in cash. And Attorney Katz said that the defendant kept on appealing this ruling. He wouldn't accept the court's ruling, so he kept on appealing. He even went and hired a new lawyer to appeal and lost, just kept on losing. And finally, he comes to what Attorney Katz described as the end of the road. He's lost. There's nothing else to appeal. He owes Michelle these things. He's losing these items. He's losing these assets. We're done. And the defendant simply wouldn't stand for that. He just wouldn't accept it. He just wouldn't accept that Michelle had left him and that she had taken some of his property and his assets and his money and his time with his son with her. The motive in this case, ladies and gentlemen, is not only very apparent but it is very strong. And again, one of the oldest motives in the book, right? A jilted lover. There have been stories about that beginning of time. Now, we know, in addition to a motive to kill Michelle, we know that the defendant wanted her dead. Well, how do we know that? What did the evidence tell us? Well, the defendant said it. He said it to Bill Stewart, who testified on Friday. He said, "I'll just shoot her and let them figure it out." At Thanksgiving, just days before he shot her, the defendant said in front of Alexis and Leanne that he hoped the victim got ass cancer. The defendant told us. And how did he tell us? Not on the stand, but in that video that we saw of the real Bill Long. Bill Long out drinking beer, running his mouth, hurling insults and threats at the restaurant while his son sits right beside him. And what did he say to Michelle that day? "I will kill you." Michelle Long recorded the confession of her own killer, and you got to see that evidence in court. And ladies and gentlemen, in addition to that evidence, he wanted her dead, he had a reason that he wanted her dead. Let's talk about the timeline of events on November 29th. So, we have here the early movements of the day. And I've listed the times that the witnesses testified to, the event that was going on, as well as where are we getting this information? Why do we know this piece of information? So we know that we have at 2:01, our timeline begins with the defendant and he's leaving work at Valerick in Youngstown. Uneventful, right? And we know that because his Life 360 shows us that. At 2:26 p.m., the defendant's at Latonia Schools. We heard some testimony. He's there to pick up his son that day, and his Life 360 data tells us that too. We also see him on the Latonia Schools video at 2:32 p.m. We see the defendant there. We see Michelle, our victim, there, and we also see Brandon. And you can see that Brandon leaves with the defendant, his father. And then at 2:34 p.m., Michelle's Life 360 data shows her at Latonia Schools as well. Then we move into the portion of the day leading up to Michelle's homicide. And you'll see that the defendant is making some moves toward Michelle, and that Michelle is just out running the errands she has that day. 2:53 and 2:54 p.m., the defendant is southbound on 164 driving by D.W. Dickey's. He's going toward the garage out at his dad's house, and he's in the white truck. And we saw that on his Life 360, and we also saw the Dickey's video of that white truck passing. 2:54 p.m., he lands at the garage at his dad's house. And again, his Life 360 tells us that. 2:58 p.m., Michelle is at Attorney Katz's office in Canfield. We know that because her Life 360 tells us that. 3:53 p.m., the defendant speaks on the phone with his girlfriend Leanne, and we know that from his call log that's retrieved from his cell phone. 4:46 and 4:47 p.m., we have Michelle at Arby's in Salem. And we know that because her Life 360 puts her there, and also there's a receipt for what she purchased. You'll remember the Arby's bag and cup were actually in her car when she was found. 5:08 p.m., the defendant speaks with Richard Todd. Now, we know that from his call log. And this is the gentleman who came to court and testified that he saw the defendant sitting there at the end of the driveway. He's in the blue truck, and he says, "Bill, is that you?" And Bill says, yeah, that he's going out to drive that blue truck. I think that he said that he was going to burn something off the motor. We then hear 5:17 to 5:18. We can see the defendant. He's northbound. He again goes by Dickey's on 164, but this time he's heading away from the garage toward 807 North Market. Now here we have a video, and we have his Life 360 here. But here, he's not in that white truck anymore. Now he's in the blue truck. 5:22 p.m. The defendant lands at 807 North Market Street, and you heard Lieutenant, actually now Chief Deputy Wyckoff testify that he's in the front yard in the bush area. So we don't see him going inside the house from what we can tell, and that shows up on his Life 360 data too. And then at 5:22 p.m., the defendant goes off the grid essentially. His phone doesn't record any more health data during this time frame. There's no movement, there's no steps being recorded, no mileage being recorded. He's not doing anything with the phone during this time. And based upon your reason and your common sense, we can infer that he left this phone here at 807 North Market. Just leaves it. He's not using it, he doesn't even have it. 5:24 p.m., Michelle's at Walmart in Salem, again just doing her normal things. 5:24 p.m., we see her there on her Life 360. 5:24 p.m. also, we have defendant passing Drug Mart in the blue truck. 5:25 p.m., we have him passing Sunoco in the blue truck. 5:25 p.m. again, we have him passing Morris Auto in the blue truck. And we know that from those surveillance videos that they provided. We can see that blue truck going by. 5:27 p.m., Michelle in Walmart in Salem. And we know that she's checking out at that time. She buys that TV because, again, we have a receipt that shows us that. 4:45 p.m., Michelle's Life 360 and the security recording from her home bring her to 29906 Cary Road, her residence, where she pulls up to the mailbox to get her mail. 5:45 p.m., we see the second vehicle coming. We see on her DVR the truck come. She's shot. And we have no more movement from Michelle after this time. And ladies and gentlemen, the state submits to you that in that truck that pulls up at Michelle's is the defendant, William Long. Now, we've heard that there's some travel time between 807 North Market, where defendant lived with Leanne, and Cary Road, and the garage. None of these things are right by each other. And 5:54 p.m., about 9 minutes after we know Michelle is shot, the defendant misses a call from Leanne. His girlfriend calls him and he doesn't answer. 5:58 p.m., his girlfriend calls him again and he still doesn't answer. Why doesn't he answer? Because he doesn't have his phone. Remember, there's no activity on his phone during this time. Why? Because it's sitting at 807 North Market, where he left it when he was here. 6:12 p.m., his health data resumes. We heard testimony from his girlfriend that he then calls her back. He's missed her calls and he calls her back. 6:13 p.m., the defendant southbound on Beaver Street heading toward the garage in the blue truck. His Life 360 data is showing him on the move again. And we know at 6:15 p.m., the defendant southbound, still in that blue truck, still going toward the garage. He's passing Dickies. We can see him on the video. And then 6:16 p.m., he lands back at the garage, and his Life 360 data puts him there. And ladies and gentlemen, this is the timeline that the evidence established with regard to the movements of Michelle and the movements of the defendant, or more specifically, in some instances, the defendant's phone. All of the timing, ladies and gentlemen, adds up. The defense told you in opening the math isn't mathing. But do you see anything on this timeline that makes us think the defendant wasn't at Cary Road? It makes sense, reason and common sense. Ladies and gentlemen, the defendant, William Long, did this. That element is proven. Now, purposely, you can't get much more deliberate than what the defendant did in this case. Pulls up next to the victim at her mailbox. She's outside her home, a place where we should all feel safe is at our home. Fired a high caliber handgun, a .44, and you heard testimony from Chief Deputy Wyckoff that that's a gun that one might take out with them for protection from wild animals. And he fires, and he fires, and he fires into the victim's face, into Michelle's eye, into her jaw, into her body. A bullet goes inside and damages her organs, and then just leaves her out there for dead like roadkill in her truck. It's hours before anybody realizes that she's hurt. Ladies and gentlemen, that is purpose. With prior calculation and design, so this is the element that we talked about early on that can be known as premeditation. A lot of us know this as premeditation. Defendant had been thinking about killing Michelle for months, if not more. And why do we know that? Because he's telling people, right? He's saying it. He's saying it to Michelle. He's saying it to his friends. He formed a plan to kill her, and he did. He carried it out. Now, the plan doesn't have to be weeks or months in the making. It could be a plan he came up with that day. And he waited until dark. And we know that there's very little lighting out on Cary Road. Again, you heard it's more of a rural area. You can see on the video surveillance, that DVR from Michelle's. It's pretty dark out there. And the defendant waits until a time when he knows Brandon isn't going to be there, right? He doesn't want his son out there for this. And he knows Brandon's not going to be there because he has left Brandon at the garage out at his dad's. He switches trucks. He leaves that white truck behind, and now he's in the blue truck. He switched guns. The .45 caliber handgun that he keeps in his white truck, well, he didn't take that with him. Instead, he takes the .44. And let's talk about the .44. The .44 Magnum means something to this defendant. Why do we think that? Because you heard testimony and actually saw the physical exhibit here that the defendant carried a .44 caliber bullet on his keychain, on the keychain for that blue truck. It means something to him. Per the divorce documents, this defendant had a Ruger .44 Magnum. That was one of the things during the divorce he didn't contest in this hotly contentious divorce, the value of a .44 Magnum. And he has that lone round in the Charger's trunk. 144 round left. But police are never able to find that gun or the rest of the ammunition. And remember that after the crime, it's the defendant that has control of those things. He has hours before Michelle's body is even discovered. The defendant even takes the step in this prior calculation and design, in this plan, to take his phone to 807 North Market and leave it there. He has Life 360. Life 360 is a program that is designed to let your family and other people who you give it access to know where you are, right? People use it to track their loved ones, their kids. They're just to make sure that they're somewhere and they're safe. He knows he has an app on his phone that's going to tell exactly where he was. So he doesn't take that phone to kill his ex-wife, because who takes that? He leaves that at 807 North Market, where it essentially goes dormant or shows no activity, and then he goes and carries out this plan. After he shoots her, he flees the scene, leaves her dead in her truck, and then he lies to Leanne, to his girlfriend Leanne. He tells her that he was at 807 taking a shit. That's what she testified to. Because she confronts him about, why aren't you answering my calls? And that's what he says he was doing. And the problem with that is that no one saw him at 807 North Market. After he drops off his phone, nobody sees him there. Alexis is there, Leanne's daughter. Austin, her boyfriend, comes to pick her up. You heard that Valerie, Devin's Alexis's brother Devin's girlfriend is there. Nobody sees the defendant. Nobody sees his truck. His phone's there. We know that, right? Because Life 360 tells us that. His phone is there. But he is not. This isn't an empty house where we're left to be like, well, maybe he was in there. Maybe he was going to the bathroom. Maybe he was hanging out at 807 North Market. He wasn't. And we know that because people were home. And guess who they didn't see? Bill Long. This was planned. Prior calculation and design. And then finally, ladies and gentlemen, caused the death of Michelle A. Long. We know that she was a healthy woman before this happened. You heard from the forensic pathologist, there was nothing else that caused her death. It is the gunshots to her face, to her head, to her body. And ladies and gentlemen, this is aggravated murder. Now, turning to the offense of murder. Murder is what is known essentially as a lesser included offense of the aggravated murder. All of the elements of murder were already included in aggravated murder, you can see. Aggravated murder is aggravated because it includes this extra element of prior calculation and design. So, ladies and gentlemen, if you believe that all of the elements of aggravated murder were proven, these same elements are proven here as murder, which we've lost. So we're here on the same date, still in Columbiana County, the same defendant, William Long, still acting purposely, causing the death of Michelle Long. We just talked about all of these elements, and they're all the same. Now, turning to count 3. This is the discharge of firearm on or near prohibited premises. Some of these elements are going to be the same, but some of these are going to be different. So same date, same place, Columbiana County, same defendant, and this time discharged a firearm. We know in this case that he fired multiple shots. There are no shell casings found at the scene, which law enforcement told you likely would be the result of using a revolver that doesn't eject those casings. We know the defendant had one because his cousin, Robert Morris, testified that he shot it with the defendant. And the gunshots shatter the windows of Michelle's truck. They shatter her body. A bullet is left lodged in her vehicle in what was described as, I believe, the B column where the seatbelt attaches. Certainly discharged a firearm. And then upon or over a public roadway or highway, we heard that the shooting actually took place, shooting right on Cary Road. And then finally, and caused physical harm, serious physical harm, to any person. So serious physical harm is defined. The judge is going to give you all the definitions of law that you need. Certainly, gunshot wounds, I submit to you, will fit that definition, as they are probably some of the most serious harm one could incur, and death. And ladies and gentlemen, that's count 3. Now let's look finally to the firearm specifications. Before I knock everything over, we're going to go ahead and talk about these. So, firearm specifications are an extra finding that is going to be attached to every one of these crimes. So, aggravated murder, and then the discharging the firearm over a prohibited premises, the roadway. All of these have a firearm specification attached. You're going to separately decide whether you think for each one of these crimes, if you find the defendant guilty of those crimes, then that the firearm specification is met. So the defendant, William Long, we've talked about him, had a firearm on or about his person or under his control. So we know he brings the firearm to Cary Road, had it on his person or under his control. And under his control could be it was in a holster, it was in his car, it was in his glove box, it was under his control. While committing the offense, so while committing aggravated murder, while committing murder, while committing discharge of the firearm over the roadway. And obviously, in our case, those are simple, right? Because in order to do those things, you had to have a gun. While committing the offense, and displayed the firearm, brandished the firearm, indicated that he possessed it or used it to facilitate the offense. And I would suggest to you that multiple of these are met in this case. Certainly he used it to facilitate the offense. He shot somebody, but he also likely would have brandished it, showed that he possessed it, displayed it, if he stuck it out the window, if he pointed it at Michelle. We have multiple ways that that is met. And ladies and gentlemen, that's it. Those are the crimes. Now, remember as you retire to the jury room that it is your job to decide credibility. That's one of the jobs that you have, to determine which of the witnesses is telling you the truth and to believe some, all, or none of their testimony according to what you think. And I'd like you to think of the state's witnesses. You saw multiple members of law enforcement, Ohio BCI, the state crime lab. Many of the witnesses were even defendants' own friends and family members. Bill Stewart, who testified on Friday, he said that him and the defendant used to be best friends. Kellen Long, the young man who testified that he was out at the garage at the defendant's father's house working on vehicles and the defendant left in the blue truck. Well, he's the defendant's nephew, and they used to hang out. Sarah Lewis, the victim's sister, she introduced the defendant to her sister, Michelle. Robert Morris is his cousin. They spent time together with the ladies in their lives. They shot guns together. Leanne Beednell, who testified, she used to be, or may still be, the defendant's girlfriend. She was someone who suspected defendant killed the victim, but she tried not to. All of the young people that you heard from that were at 807 North Market, Valerie, Alexis, Austin, they were clearly nervous, they were clearly young. But they knew that the defendant wasn't at 807 North Market when Michelle was killed. And they did come into court, and they did tell you that. Now, ladies and gentlemen, some of these state's witnesses didn't want to be here. It was clear. But they came and they testified to their piece of the puzzle. They lifted that shroud of innocence. I believe Attorney Beatrice described it as a shroud over the defendant by presenting evidence and testimony to prove to you that he did this. Piece by piece, these witnesses showed you that it was the defendant, Bill Long, that killed Michelle. And also, you're going to be called upon to judge the defendant's witnesses. You judge the credibility of everybody here, including the defendant, since he testified. Jim Stafford, the guy who talked about the phones, he's paid $30,000 by the defendant in this case. He's owed more. And he told you the defendant's phone was at 807 North Market when Michelle was killed. Okay, the state's witnesses told you the same thing. Did you learn anything new from Leanne Beednell this morning? Anything you hadn't really heard from her before? She testified last week. And then the defendant testified to finish out his case, and you'll judge his credibility as well. He admitted he owned a Ruger 44 Magnum. He admitted that on the evening of November 29, 2023, he was driving that blue truck. And during the time frame that the evidence shows that defendant was out at Cary Road shooting Michelle, the defendant during his testimony claims that he was at 807 North Market using the toilet for 5 to 10 minutes, and then laying on the bed in the bedroom. But ladies and gentlemen, that is directly controverted by his own health data. Remember Detective Howder with the beard that came and testified? And in the defendant's cell phone is his health data, right? And that appears on our timeline. The phone is recording the movements, right? His steps, his mileage, what he's doing. It's keeping track of his health. 5:22 p.m., last health data recorded for defendant. 6:12 p.m., the data picks up again. So we have 50 minutes here where nothing is being recorded. And even by the defendant's own version of events, if you were to find that believable, he should have walked up the steps, which would have been recorded in his step count, to get to the bathroom, right? He said he used the bathroom upstairs. He said he went in the bedroom and he laid down on the bed for a period of time. He's not moving through the house. He's not going up and down the stairs. There's just nothing. The phone just doesn't see him doing anything during that time. And that's because it is just laying there. It is not with him. And the defendant during his testimony as well testified that Alexis, Valerie, and Austin, he heard the kids in the house. He testified to that this morning. But oddly, no one saw him. Alexis is even upstairs in her room, if you'll recall her testimony, but she doesn't hear the defendant come in. She doesn't hear him go into the bathroom. She doesn't hear him go into the bedroom. She doesn't hear him walking around in the old house that they live in with the creaky floors. No one saw his truck there. He's just not there. And you decide whether you believe the testimony that he gave you this morning. The evidence simply doesn't support his version of events. And ladies and gentlemen, who here has a motive to lie to you? Just like in his divorce with Michelle, who here has something to lose? The defendant. This case is a very important case, but it's not a complicated case. I ask you to look at the evidence. You're going to have all of the exhibits back there in the jury room with you. You'll have the photographs. You'll have the binder of Michelle's text messages with the defendant. You'll have all of this evidence for you to look at yourselves. I encourage you to do it. Use your reason and your common sense. Talk with each other. The evidence leads you to only one conclusion, and it's that the defendant is guilty of aggravated murder, discharging a firearm over a prohibited premises, and the firearm specifications to all counts. Thank you.
Folks, thank you for your attentiveness over the past week. You guys are tasked with paying attention, taking time out of your lives to come here and listen to this very important matter. And I know attorneys for both sides appreciate you guys doing that and being so attentive throughout this trial. I agree with the state when they say that this really isn't that complicated, because it's not. The state complicated it. At the beginning of this trial, I told you that the state was going to put on a character assassination, and that's exactly what happened. They paraded in witnesses in this courtroom to depict to you what a monster he is. and they snapshotted a time of his life where there was so much turmoil, and they took every single bad thing that they claim that he said, that he admits that he said, every single bad thing, but you didn't hear one person have a good thing to say about Bill Long. 26 years of marriage, not one redeemable quality. Monster. You know, when you go back to the jury room, I'm going to encourage you to take this book, State's Exhibit 57, and read these text messages. Read them. On cross-examination, they cherry-picked 12 messages over a year and gave you the 12 worst. They didn't talk to you about when her account was depleted and he went and put money in it. They didn't talk to you about when they went to dinner or had nice things to say to each other, even after that horrible recording. You didn't hear about those messages because that doesn't fit the narrative. It doesn't fit the narrative. See, the case is simple. But they're the ones who accused us at the beginning of, they're going to distract you. We're not distracting you. It's right in front of you. The evidence is right in front of you. They have assumptions and speculation. We have evidence that's corroborated by Life 360. Corroborated. They can't corroborate the murder. All they can do is assassinate his character. He told you he was going to do it. He told you he was going to do it. He told you. Anybody who knows anybody who's been through a divorce understands how that goes. It's the worst of the worst. People hate each other. Read the messages. They talk about, we can split land, I'll let you on the land. They were agreeable. It just fell out. And this nonsense about he wouldn't let it go and he kept appealing and hiring lawyers. People have a right in a divorce to do that. Anybody does that. And 9 times out of 10, that's not at the direction of the client, it's at the direction of the lawyer. That's ridiculous. 3 lawyers. That means nothing. He has every right to fight for what he believes he's entitled to. That's not an admission of guilt. Can you imagine somebody going back through your messages in your life years later and just cherry picking all of your worst moments? Because we've all had them in some capacity. We may have not said the things that he said, and the things that he said weren't right. And he told you he's embarrassed by him. And you know how you know that? Because you heard the text message read from the stand where he apologized the next day. Does it excuse the behavior? No, it's pathetic behavior. But he was an alcoholic and a drunk and a bad one. And 9 out of 10 times, the terrible things that came out of his mouth were under the influence of alcohol. You didn't hear any evidence when he showed up at the scene that night that he was drunk, because that's when the monster comes out. Reason and common sense. The judge is going to give you an instruction on reason and common sense. And in this case, I think that you really need to use your reason and common sense. So what do I mean? Life 360 plots you through Michelle Long's afternoon and evening. She leaves school. She goes to her sister's. She goes to her lawyer's. They even put a picture of her lawyer's office on the stand to show you. This is how accurate Life 360 is. This is how accurate it is. Then she goes to Arby's. Then she goes to Walmart. And then she arrives home at Cary Road. This guy's with his son at a garage. What evidence did you see that he had tracking devices in her car or was communicating with somebody that was following her? How does Bill Long pull up 18 seconds later and murder her? Use your reason and common sense and think about it. How does he know to be there? This was premeditated. Right? He's been thinking about this for months. And oh, by the way, he's going to leave his phone with Life 360. Why not turn Life 360 off 3 or 4 months ago if you knew you were going to kill her? It's a little more logical. You know, he's dumb enough to get in his blue Silverado, which he had when he lived at that residence with all the neighbors around there. and he's going to drive it to his old house where he lived for all those years, and he's going to shoot his ex-wife in front of cameras he installed. Make that make sense. You heard Leanne Bednow. Bill didn't think he needed a lawyer the next day. She was, what? They confiscated your phone, your car, a gun. You don't think you need a lawyer. You heard them. I figured they'd go through it and let me go. Get my stuff back. Didn't seem like that would be the reaction of somebody who just shot his ex-wife 4 times. Let's talk about the state's evidence in this case. Or lack of evidence. Assumptions and speculation have carried the day from the beginning of this trial. Assumptions and speculation. So, they get Bill Long's white truck the night Michelle's killed, and they test it. But there's no gunshot residue. Now, you heard from the stand about gunshot residue, and it can transfer. No gunshot residue in the white truck. They learn later he's in the blue truck. They get the blue truck. No gunshot residue. The glass, you saw it on the bed of Michelle's truck in the general area of the street. They didn't say, oh, there's clean vacuum marks, this just truck's clean, pristine at this time. No. Glass would have flown back. No glass in the blue truck. There's absolutely no forensic evidence. Actually, the forensic evidence supports Bill Long's story, which he has told from the beginning. What he told Leanne. They got him supposedly at Sunoco, but then the man disappears into thin air. They go to all these cameras and they can't ever find it again. They never find him coming back. So they claim to use Life 360 as a starting point to find him leaving, but then they don't use anything from 545 to find him coming back. Or they can't find him coming back because he didn't go there. See, investigations, when you find evidence, when you get statements, when you have assumptions, you corroborate them with evidence. That's what is so great about the era that we live in now. Modern technology, forensic science. You can corroborate stories. You can build them. And they did that in this case. They grabbed Life 360 and they built it, right? And they want you to use it to convict him. But they don't want you to use it when it benefits him. When he's in the house and the phone moves at 5:56, did you hear any evidence that a dog moved the phone, that a squirrel came in? I mean, that's real evidence. You heard from an expert witness tell you the most reliable evidence he received was Life 360. Why? Because it's GPS, health data on your phone. You know, you didn't hear he had one of those wrists or ankle monitors that was monitoring his health data. A health data app, that's going to carry the day. Use that to convict him. Their own witness testified. Well, I mean, you know, you don't know how much you need to move to get it going or calories. That's nonsense. It's junk science. GPS is real science. And they used it. They used it the whole trial. They wanted it. Just not for 556. So, why is that so important? Well, he told, front of the house is the bedroom. That's more in the middle of the house. That's 556. By Chief Deputy Wyckoff's own statement and by Jim Stafford's own statement, that phone appears to move. Wyckoff said it appears to move. Well, you don't have to listen to him. Look for yourself. Stafford said the phone registers when it moves. It moved. but they don't want to talk about it. When the state stands back up, ask them to explain 556. These GPSs are so precise that they actually put you on the side of the road you're traveling. And remember back here, this is where Lexi's room is. And she told you, I know when people come. I have a big window. I see out of it. I know when they come in and out. I hear them coming in the back door. Well, even by the state's own theory, he's there. She never saw him. She never saw him pull through the back. You can't use evidence when it works for you and then ask somebody to discredit it when it works against you. You just can't do it. That's reasonable doubt right there. That's forensic evidence that demonstrates and corroborates his story. Jim Stafford came here from Florida. Yes, he was paid. Yes, he still owed money. This guy's life is on the line. So they did what they had to do as a family to give him a best shot. But does that discredit his testimony? Because he's paid? He gets paid by the prosecutor. You heard that in Florida. The DOJ. People should be paid for their services. But this is data. This is forensics. This is the state's evidence. Jim Stafford didn't create this file. It was given to him. See, the difference is he plotted all the points. They didn't. Because it didn't fit the narrative. Folks, to convict somebody in the United States of America in a criminal case, the state has to prove the case beyond a reasonable doubt. It's the highest burden in the justice system. You need to be firmly convinced by the evidence. Evidence that you would rely upon in your most important affairs. Bill Long got convicted in the court of public opinion the day after Michelle was killed. He sat in jail, and he has been fighting for his freedom since that day. But just because the court of public opinion convicted him, and just because they prayed in witnesses that all think he did it, you guys are the judge of the evidence. You've heard the real story. You've seen the evidence. Nobody else has seen that. You 12 people get to make this call. This was a sad week. You hear terrible things. You see terrible things. And by all accounts, Michelle Long was a lovely person. A beloved daughter, mother, teacher, aunt, you name it. And that's a terrible thing that she's gone. But it's just as much of a travesty to put somebody away because people think he did it. When there's evidence, forensic evidence that suggests differently. He took the stand and he told you what he did and where he was. And it so happens to be that his story can be corroborated by evidence the state handed over to try and convict him with. You saw the demeanor of the chief deputy when we plotted that point during these cross-examination. They've got no answer for it. And if they did, you would have heard it. Folks, it's not our job to solve this case, but I certainly think that we've produced evidence to you that there is so much reasonable doubt in this case. So much. This was a broken family that lost a son, that overcame probably the most horrific tragedy you ever can imagine. They weren't perfect. They were simple people, blue-collar working people, the type of people that this country's backs were built on. And everybody knows the hardships that the blue-collar people in this country have taken on throughout this country's history. They're not perfect. He's not perfect. I would never say he's perfect, but he is a person. And if somebody is going to convict him of aggravated murder, I would hope that they bring enough evidence to convince 12 people beyond a reasonable doubt that he did it. Folks, I asked you at the beginning, and I'm going to ask you again. Set Bill Long free. Let him return to what's left of his family. Thank you.
I did tell you in my opening statement that I predicted the defense would try and distract you from the evidence in this case. Hey, look over here. This is just a character assassination. Or look over there at all that glass. Or look over here at the 556. And that's their job, and that's what happened, and that's fine. This case isn't about 556. And Jim Stafford is the only one that told you that that phone moved, but he couldn't tell you how he knew that. The guy that got paid $30,000 to come here and testify, he's the only one that told you that. What did the 556 tell us? That his device was at 807 North Market at 556 on November 29th of 2023 at the same time he wasn't there. I'm going to highlight what the evidence did show. This is what we know from the evidence in this case. Number one, the divorce didn't go his way. There's no question about it. He told you that on the stand. Number two, he was not happy about how the divorce went. There was no dispute that he was angry about how the divorce went. On November 28th, 2023, a judge denied the objections, the appeals. It was the end of the road for the divorce. At that point, this defendant had 100,000 reasons to kill Michelle Long. And on the following day, that's what he did. We know he switched vehicles from the white truck to the blue truck. We know he left the garage at 518. We know that he knew Brandon was at the garage, so Brandon wasn't going to be at Cary Road. We know he drove to 807 North Market. He arrived there at about 5:21 p.m. His phone remained there until 6:13 p.m. It's approximately 52 minutes. And when you look at the location of the phone, it certainly appears to be on the front porch or in the bushes. And we don't know exactly how it got there. Did he walk his phone up the alley and drop it on the porch? Did he drive through, toss it out the window into the bush? Only he knows that. And we know he wasn't in the house at 807 North Market. No witness saw him there. That's the evidence in this case. He was not in that house for that 52-minute period. He was off the grid. He left his phone at 807 North Market to make it look like he was there. He headed north through Lisbon to Cary Road. You saw his truck at Sunoco, Drug Mart, Morris Auto. That was his truck. A lot of people own trucks in this county. I'm sure the majority of you guys own trucks or know somebody that owns a truck, but only one person in the entire world owned that truck on November 29th of 2023, and it was him. And he admitted that he was driving it that day. You saw it on the videos. The chrome strip, the chrome running board. And he had that truck for 12 days after the murder. He had control of that evidence for 12 days after the murder. And he drove to Cary Road. And he drove to Cary Road to kill Michelle. With his alternate truck and his alternate gun. It didn't matter if she was in a room in the basement, if she was in the kitchen cooking dinner, if she was pulling into the driveway, or if she was at the end of the driveway getting her mail. He was going there to kill her. And that's what he did. And it didn't matter where the cameras were. He knew where the cameras were and what they showed. He's the one that installed them. In that 52-minute period when he did not unlock his phone, no movement was recorded. No flights of stairs were taken. He drove to 807. He drove from 807 North Market to Cary Road. You heard testimony that generally takes about 18 to 20 minutes. And there's dozens of ways you can get from 807 to Cary Road and from Cary Road back to 807. The trip could be as long as the driver wanted it to be, but it could be as short as 18 minutes. We don't know exactly what route he took, or what route he took there, or what route he took back. Only he knows that. And there is simply no question that the numbers match up in this case. Michelle was murdered at approximately 5:45 p.m. That's approximately 23 minutes after he left 807 North Market Street. It took him approximately 27 minutes to return back to 807 after he committed the murder and retrieve his phone from the porch or the bush or wherever it was. Did it take him longer to get back because he stopped somewhere to get rid of the .44 Magnum? Only he knows that. Or did it take him longer because he was waiting at the end of the road and she happened to drive by? Only he knows that. We do know that he had $30,000 in guns and ammo, and that he did own a Ruger 44. We don't know exactly how many .44 Magnums he had, but we know he had at least one. The evidence in this case showed that the only person who had a problem with Michelle Long was this defendant. Teachers don't randomly get executed while they're getting their mail in Columbiana County. The evidence in this case leads to one conclusion about who killed Michelle, and that conclusion is that he did it. Before you begin your deliberations, I'm going to highlight a few of the defendant's own words about Michelle Long that you heard throughout this trial. I hope Michelle dies of ass cancer. He said that at Thanksgiving in front of his own son and her son. But he knew she didn't have cancer. She wasn't going to die from cancer anytime in the immediate future. Your mom will have me in jail for Christmas. And he texted that to Brandon on November 22nd of 2023. That was 1 week prior to Michelle being killed. And you heard testimony that was a very real possibility. You heard from Attorney Katz that Michelle hadn't received a dime of the $100,000, which was a violation of the court order. When you violate a court order, that leads to a contempt, and a contempt can land you in jail. And he wasn't going to accept that. Defendant was not going to accept that. And he was not in jail for Christmas that year because Michelle was dead. The divorce was over. She keeps pushing. Everyone knows how it's going to end. You saw that was true too. Pretty much anyone who knew about the defendant and Michelle in 2023 was worried that the defendant was going to hurt Michelle. On one end of that spectrum, you have Sarah Lewis, Michelle's sister, who told you she immediately knew he did it. On the other end of that spectrum, you have Leanne Beadnell, who was dating the defendant, was probably the closest person to him at that time, actually sent a text to the defendant saying, "I'm worried you're going to shoot Michelle." You better hope something changes in a couple weeks. And you actually heard the defendant say that on the video to Michelle when she was locked in her bedroom, September of 2023. And we now know that nothing changed with the divorce. Nothing could change. Nothing was going to change. As of November 28th, he still owed the child support, he still owed the alimony, he still owed the $100,000. And the following day, what changed was Michelle's life and the lives of everybody that knew her and cared about her. I'll kill you. I guarantee I will. He said that to Michelle. You heard it. That's what he did. When the judge explains the legal standards that you're going to use to decide this case, she's going to explain proof beyond a reasonable doubt. And she's going to explain to you that that is a standard, it's based in reason and common sense. You must be firmly convinced of the truth. There's juries seated all over the state of Ohio and all over the country today that are deciding cases like this based on that same standard. And it's a standard that we gladly accept. I'm asking you to return guilty verdicts as to all counts and all specifications in this case because the evidence supports it, the law requires it, and justice demands it. This defendant told Bill Stewart that if the divorce didn't go his way, he was just going to shoot Michelle and let them figure it out. Well, the divorce didn't go his way. He shot Michelle, and we sure as hell figured it out.